1, 2.
Welcome back, Chappelle!
Oh, it's so loud. All right.
So good.
Yeah, bye, girls.
You better put it in
No,
there.
he's gonna edit it out.
Yeah,
No, I would never do that.
yes, you will.
Don't do that.
You're gonna
It'd be
edit
really
it out.
sad.
No, I won't edit it out.
I'm gonna look.
We're gonna be very mad if that's edited out.
Alright.
This
Hopefully
is
we don't get lost on the way back.
We need emotional support.
Go to school. Go to class. Go learn. All right, anyway. Oh my God. What?
Ow. Mr. Terry, have you ever worn an embarrassing Halloween costume before?
Yes, why?
Because we need a segment for Chip Chat and we want you to be in it.
This is actually for Chip Chat.
We will discuss. I'll talk to you next period.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll
Alright.
just bring the camera
Wait,
then.
All right,
I'm not
go
in
Chip
this
Chat.
period. I
My
wanna-
one question, do you have the pictures?
I'm literally recording a flip like as we speak. What do you? No, God.
Hey. Okay, bye.
Imagine if I edited video.
Yeah. Bye, girls. Bye. Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, anyway, get out. All right, so anyway, the Dark Ages, right? So in A period, we got to this today. Sorry about for the first 4 minutes of that everybody was like invading my space. Now, the Dark Ages, right, was a time of limited learning, poor leadership, bad economics, right? So we talked in class for the last couple days about how, like, the Easterners were actually having a golden age, right, during this time period. And then we were talking about how the Byzantine Empire was doing great things during this time period. Well, now we're getting into the Western territory of Rome. So the Western Europe, the Western territory of Rome, Western Europe is going to be going through what's called like a Dark Age, quote unquote, right? So why is this a Dark Age again? We said limited learning, poor leadership, bad economics, right? Now, there's a huge amount of bias here because there were tons and tons of people doing great things. This, for an example, is just yet another image of why the Easterners were doing great. Following the conversion to Islam by the Arab community, they actually expanded to this gigantic empire that even went to the south of Spain, right? So as you can tell, the Easterners are doing great stuff, right? So really quick though, we have to define the medieval period. Some of you are like, oh my God, more time periods. Yes, more time periods. All right, so we have to define the medieval period and where it like falls. We also then had to define like, we have another chart and stuff. You can see that I go in like a certain flow. Now, some of you are immediately probably like, well, why aren't we talking about geography? Well, it's like a huge end of a continent, right? Like, I mean, we couldn't talk about geography of all these different places at once, so this is the first time that we won't be bringing that up, okay? Now, but when you're defining the medieval period, you have 3 eras of history overall, right? You have the ancient times or classical civilizations, which is the Neolithic period, the ancient Greeks, the Romans, and then you have the medieval period, which is the fall of Rome up until the Renaissance, what we're now getting into. So this is our unit right here. And then you have the modern era, which is the Renaissance to today. So we are currently existing in this 3rd time period. Now, this time period has also been called the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, but what we want to refer to it as more than anything is medieval Europe, all right? Medieval, M-E-D-I-E-V-A-L, all right? Medieval Europe. So basically, this is Europe just kind of like getting back on its feet again. It's getting back after it. It's figuring themselves out. Because a lot of people in class today were like, well, how come they didn't have a good established government and stuff? Because the Romans did all their stuff and blah, 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 blah. Now, well, when Rome fell, all of their infrastructure went with it, right? As you could tell when we were talking about the Byzantines, the Romans were still around. They were just geographically located much further to the east, right? So, and they supported Italy and parts of Spain for a little while under Justinian. But your bigger countries like current-day France, Germany, the UK, all of your Denmark, the Netherlands, all those guys in the middle of Europe, they're just now getting a chance to create a system of their own and then create countries of their own. And they're now the most powerful countries in all of Europe. So ironically enough, we're kind of showing the stage. We're setting the stage for their rise to dominance, right? So in the medieval period, we've got 3 time periods, right? So as you can see, we have the early Middle Ages, the high Middle Ages, and the late Middle Ages. Now, I don't have a way to remember. I know we were like, Nathan means bacon me while mommy dancing around Charlie's house. And they were like, Kyle ruins everything. I don't have one for early, high, and late. Maybe if y'all want to come up with one that you feel is appropriate and like actually good for class, we'll discuss. All right. So anybody that wants to do that, maybe there's a little bit extra credit in there for you if you come up with a way to remember early Middle Ages, high Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. All right. So, but your early Middle Ages run from about 500, which is the fall of Rome, to about 1000 A.D. Right, which is everything's a little very chaotic and a lot of crazy stuff's going on. Then you have your high Middle Ages, right, which is about 1000 to 1300 A.D., and then you have your late Middle Ages. And your late Middle Ages is from about 1300 to 1500, right? Now, if you want a way to describe each of these really quick before we even get anywhere, so early Middle Ages is chaotic fall of Rome and the reestablishment of civilization. The high Middle Ages is a period of growth, so things were getting much, much better. And then the late Middle Ages is chaotic, all right? So the late Middle Ages kind of set them backwards a couple of hundred years because a lot of terrible, crazy, chaotic things actually went down in the late Middle Ages. So it was like early, getting set back up, high, getting back up there, right, as in high Middle Ages, as in a period of progress, and then late Middle Ages like, and then they went right back down again, right? So medieval Europe, though, it's a very rough life out there as this guy is actually enjoying himself in the Middle Ages. So this is the era that's going to see the rise of like a lot of things that you've interacted with before. Knights and kings and chivalry and like castles and feudalism and like all these other things that you probably don't even realize, but they're very, very important in modern day society. But where did this all come from? Where did the Middle Ages even start? Where did Europe get its start? Where did the French come from? Where did the Germans come from? Where the Denmark? Who are the Danes? Who are those people? You know what I mean? Like, so, well, they all came about because of these early invasions, right? So the Roman emperors are going to end, okay? And they're going to kind of flatline out, okay? So the emperors get destroyed by like the Ostrogoths, and the fall of Rome occurs in 476 AD to the hands of who again? But the barbarians, right? So now, a barbarian, if you want a couple of goofy little definitions for him, a barbarian is a person believed to be in common day nomenclature an uncivilized person. As we know in the Roman language and the Greek language, it actually meant to babble because they couldn't understand what they were saying because they spoke different languages. And eventually this term basically grows to mean anyone who is not Roman. All right, because Romans believed everybody that wasn't one of them was uncivilized. Like, remember when we talked about Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, right? When he wanted to bring her back, the Romans were saying, no, do not accept her in here. She is not one of us. She is not Roman. She is a savage, right? A barbarian. So when the Romans are talking about barbarians, they're basically referring to any group of people that exists in Europe that's not one of them. Right? So they conquer things in the pursuit of land and resources. The barbarians, though, are very primitive, right? Most of them don't have a written language. Most of them don't have like a structured economy. Most of them don't have an established religious structure in the big grandiose sense that you think of Greece and Rome. They did have like some polytheistic beliefs and things like that, but they also didn't look like this, all right? So when people think barbarian, they usually think of this gigantic dude with no shirt on, he's got a giant beard, or rah, 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 he's gonna pillage some stuff, right? Barbarians actually look more like this, all right? A barbarian is basically just like a basic European, you know what I mean? Kind of like the way that, if you look at North America, and you're talking about the establishment of people in North America. Remember when like the conquistadors and Columbus and everything came over and realized that there were people already living here, where, well, those people had no access to technology. Native Americans had no access to technology, no access to forgeable metals, no access to, like, irrigation systems and things like that. So they were just living in a borderline tribal society, right? Well, these Europeans were tribal in a sense, right? But they had access to, like, metals from the Romans and other odds and ends like that. So they were a little bit more advanced than that, but they still were nowhere near as advanced as the Romans were, right? So, and the barbarians, like, they had kings and governments. We shouldn't judge them too hardly. Had them kinda. You know, like mostly they were led by chieftains and or small leaders of small groups of people. They're going to create money eventually, all right? Like they eventually create money. But the biggest thing is that these barbarians are the settlers of all of Europe and are the origins of all of its current day people. For example, my cultural heritage is English, Scotch-Irish, and Native American, that's here. But like the English and Scotch-Irish sides, I am descendant originally of the Anglo-Saxons, all right, or the Angles originally, right? And then also I'm descendant of the Celts or the Gauls, right? Like so, which are also like the Scotch-Irish, right? The Celts particularly for the Scotch-Irish, right? So those people, like Irish people, started out as a group of barbarians. The UK started out as a group of barbarians. This is a good way to look at it, actually, really, really quick. All right, so apparently Alyssa Mooney was here, so shout out to Alyssa Mooney. Hope you're having a better day. Now, anyway, so check this out. So when we look at this word, right? So we see the word England, right? That actually is a screwed up word for what they were originally called, right? So it's supposed to actually read Angle land, or the land of the Angles, right? And the Angles were the original barbarians of England, right? So eventually, as time progressed forward, they started calling it Angleland, and they eventually called it England, right? Basically meaning the land of the Angles, right? And same thing, like English is supposed to be Anglish, right? Like, so it's supposed to be a union of the early Frankish, French, like, derived forms of language, and then their Anglish, like, form of speaking, and it went together and made English, right? So, like, these people are the bedrock of European society. Everybody that's watching this flip in some way or another, unless you're directly related to people from Rome, you are descendant of a barbarian, right? So now, here's the big thing. You've got barbarians from all over the place. The big ones that you have to understand is, like, usually from the Asian sector, the big barbarian tribes are the Huns and the Magyars, right? The Magyars are going to settle parts of Hungary and Eastern Europe and Russia, and the Huns are going to actually settle like parts of Russia, Estonia, Belarus, places like that, after their big leader Attila, the Hun, actually dies, right? He dies at his wedding, which is actually crazy. He starts coughing up blood and stuff like that right after he got married. Now, anyway, from the Germanic north, though, the Germanic tribes are a big one. You got the big ones are the Saxons, the Angles, the Goths, right? And then there are even more and more of them. You've got Ostrogoths, which when they break away from the original Goths, they're going to settle the Italian peninsula. And then you got Visigoths that go to Spain, and they settle that area. And then you got the Angles and the Saxons, which are the modern-day Brits, which actually they bred together to make Anglo-Saxons, right? And then you got the Franks in Central Europe that create, like, the French kingdoms. And then you've got some original Germans that create the German kingdoms and the Holy Roman Empire. So you've got a lot of people rising up during this time period. And the barbarians are going to start organizing themselves a little bit. Barbarian tribes are going to eventually put hereditary leaders in power, right? And what I mean by hereditary is a king, right? They're eventually going to start electing leaders. Well, not electing, they didn't vote on them. But they're going to start choosing their leaders who will then be based on hereditary lines. When he dies, his son takes over. When he dies, his son takes over. When he dies, his son takes over, right? So your kings and queens and princes and like all that stuff has its early origin in barbarian society, right? And like I said, the big one is being able to list off a lot of our barbarian groups off. We got the Franks, the Huns, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Angles, the Saxons, the Vandals, the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts, the Gauls. Like, we have tons of them, right? And they're people that existed even when Rome was around. But everybody noticed them because Rome was just so what? Big and powerful and huge, right? And they're going to begin to make permanent settlements in Europe, right? They're going to start centralizing and grouping together and doing the basic Neolithic game again, right? They're going to start farming on large-scale production. They're going to start making surpluses. They're going to start doing craft work. But it's kind of like Europe has to start all over again, right? They've got little bits of Rome left in them, but not much at all to work with, right? So they got to start all over again. And even though they had single-handedly destroyed all things of intelligence and value, like the Vandals, when they came into Rome, they did a lot of murder and sacked and destroyed the entire city just to see it burn, and it's where we get the word vandalism from, right? So they didn't help us out a lot, but you know, I mean, like, you got to start somewhere, right? So the big guy that's going to start off early on, though, is this guy, and we're going to pick up with him tomorrow when we get into class, all right? And his name is Clovis, right? And he is the first Frankish king, right? But he is around from about 466 to 511, and some are like, oh, well, he was actually around when Rome was around for a very brief moment of time. We think there's actually a chance that he might have actually been a Roman military leader. We're really not sure. And then, but he conquered many small competing tribes and regional Roman political leaders, and he converts to Christianity because his wife made him. Now, I'll tell you that fun story tomorrow, and then we'll talk about his dynasty, which is called the Merovingians. And then we'll get into Charlemagne and the Carolingians. And then we'll talk about the split up of all that and the establishment of the feudal system, right? So I hope to see you guys tomorrow. We're really enjoying it. Let's kick some butt. Let's keep staying after it. And I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.